Welcome back to DM-Nastics, the gym for dungeon masters to work out their minds. I'm one of your hosts, DM Neil, aka Jolt Maniac, and I am happy to be back with
me, DM Celeste, aka Sea Witch.
Dun dun dun! and I saw you in person. Holy cow!
I know.
You got married, and I was there.
I know. It's a good reason to not be recording because an actual in-life celebration event that we both got to enjoy outside of the gym. Yeah,
it was so wonderful. The sun just
Killed
stayed
you.
out longer than I remembered because I went so
Welcome
much
to the
for
north, buddy.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about that whole thing, and I definitely got like super sunburned, and it was totally worth it.
No.
It was 100% worth it. I'd get sunburnt day after day.
Oh, thanks. We were talking about, Joe and I, my now husband, for all of you out there, we're talking about how rad it was that Neil showed up and then was like, hi, I'm here for literally like 12 hours before my flight. But at the end of the day, you're like, what can I clean up? What can I pack away? We're like, Neil was the hero of this wedding.
I was like, I'm here. The only other place I would be from here is the airport,
which nobody wants to be at. So
I would love to help tear down anything you guys need. If you need stuff loaded in a truck,
it's heroic. You win a big damn hero award.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. I was happy to be there from start to finish. It was wonderful. But we are back in the gym.
Got to get
so
swole
we're going to
after all that.
We're going to pivot very hard from such a wonderful celebration to what would it be like if the whole world kind of blew up?
Oh, yeah. It's the end of the world as we know it.
And what did I title this? I went with an old school Simpsons reference. Geez, what's with the dust? Because Homer basically wakes up in a post-apocalyptic version of his world, and is his main question is why is all this dust?
Why dusty?
Perfect. And if you wanted to hear the episode that inspired this exercise, you're going to go back to episode 231, World Building Post-Apocalypse. It's such a weird thing because I feel like so many settings have a something that is post-apocalyptic sometimes.
Yes. Well, it's also interesting because I feel in our modern sort of zeitgeist that we're in, this is like a realm where science fantasy is really shining lately. I mean, like with the Fallout series, coming out, and people are being reminded again of like, oh man, like this big old condition, right? Apocalypse, the end of the world, is a perfect stage to really make fantasy magic, like have a really interesting and meaningful place in a world. I mean, we've even seen it in classic fantasy, right? Like how many classic fantasy novels start with it was Earth one time, secret, but now we're like back in a medieval society 1,000 years later, and it's a secret by the ancients. Like this apocalypse stuff has always been a little brother, I feel like, in the genre of fantasy.
Yeah, because I think of all of the... there's only one way to say the setting. I apologize now, listeners, especially those with headphones. Numenera! Adventure Time, Eberron.
Right. Or even like DCC RPG, like feels very apocalypsy all the time. Things like, Dungeon Dark or like Merkborg. Like these things all have a feeling like the world is going to end, or they take place after the fall of some great thing, right? And we're just all salvaging, looking for our little treasures, these dungeons left everywhere by whatever was before, right? Like, even in, like, vanilla, D&D or classic, like, stuff, there are these unexplained dungeons that heroes go to get treasures, and nobody is really sure why. Like, there was just a time before when everyone's like, yes, I will put these incredible artifacts in these dungeons. Yes, please. It's always kind of been there in the background.
Yeah, and I almost feel like having it. We'll eventually get to the exercise. Don't worry. But
It'll happen.
I also feel like it's really interesting. Like in a lot of ways, I would almost consider like Eberron or a lot of the settings apocalypse settings, not necessarily post-apocalypse. Numenera is an example of what I would consider very deep post-apocalypse. Or a lot of the like deep dungeons are really in some ways potentially post-apocalypse, you know, capital post. Right. And it's been a really long time. Eberron in the Day of Mourning, like you have people that were there.
Yeah, you can actually, and you can go there, right? You can walk into those like weird, misty areas and be like, I am actively affected by the ghosts and trauma of the past.
Who just had his party plane shift into the Mournlands?
Yeah, all right. I have a lot of Mournlands based in, I think literally everything I've written for Eberron is set in the Mournlands because it's so cool. Fascinating. It's so fascinating.
The Lord of Blades, all the Warforged that are in there. Like, I mean,
even things like Ravenloft feel completely like that, right? Because it was a place that was real, and then it fell into whatever nightmare scape it is. So it's a perversion or a twisting of what is actually current and true, or was.
Yeah. So Dark Sun, another one.
Yep.
So to get to the exercise, one of the things, and again, I think that conversation is for both of us to kind of illustrate the levels to which you can implement something that is a post-apocalyptic into your game. It could be a single session. It could be like a small arc like I plan on doing in the Mournlands. It could be your entire campaign. Yeah. It is the basis of everything from character creation to your epilogue. It is that. So one of the things that I think is really important about it to sell the post-apocalyptic nature is what has mechanically changed in this post-apocalyptic version. The second question we have is, what is the narrative reason for this mechanical change? Super important. And how do the players find out about this change? And as always, number 4, you do you. All right, so our example that we have on the Discord forums, if you will, this is from none other than Letterlost. And what has mechanically changed in this post-apocalyptic version? The sun has been weakened while the world has been polluted with radiant energy. And as a result, the world is now in a twilight state at all times.
Ooh.
Everything is now resistant to radiant energy, and you kind of glow as if your skin has the complexion of fairy fire, and have access to life or light domain spells. But basically, you almost have like this clerical infusion,
like a radiated world. Yeah.
Everyone's skin is glowy.
Ah!
Oh, it's impossible to hide. That's interesting. It's an interesting
thing.
Oh
no, like, it's terrifying.
Oh yeah, you can make such scare. You could really go with some Quiet Place vibes.
Yeah.
Where, you're changing. Obviously, you're changing the sense, but
Well, and then it's also cool because, like, light, from the sun is, I feel like, an underrated part of our environment in general, because if the light conditions change, that means all the plant life changes, which means all of the animals change, right? So it's having these creatures, like, the world becomes completely different if you don't have, full, like, daylight all the time, or if like the day and night cycle goes away, or if the sun, exploded, or whatever happened to it, like the tides would be weird, the ocean would be strange. So is there like water everywhere, or like what is happening? So this is like one small example. This is a great example because this change affects so many levels of an adventuring setting.
Yeah. Well, if even going back to when we had the total eclipse recently, and like advisory warnings being like, hey, just so you know, you should really keep an eye on your pets. They may have a real hard time with the sun just magically disappearing. Or,
they're going to freak out.
Yeah, or a lot, or even just like base level of like, they all go into their night routine because they're like, well, it's nighttime because the sun disappeared, so it must be night. Yeah. And that's just a simple thing over minutes worth of time and it being a little different. Now, the reason that this happened is because the Night of Falling Stars, which was a battle involving multiple meteor swarm spells that caused debris to darken the sky, causing the Dark Decade.
It's always a wizard's fault.
That's what I thought
this
too.
Is an exceptional apocalypse scenario.
Gosh darn it. Just throwing spells at each other, and now it all,
You can always blame a wizard.
Mm-hmm. And now, because of that, basically you've like compacted everything for that decade, and then boom, you have this radiant infusion throughout. And so, how do the players find out? When the pale sun sets in a black sky filled with stars, the sky lights up with color as the clouds glow with radiant light of auroras. Visibility remains the same. The skin, now devoid of color, glows softly, allowing them to nearly disappear in the glowing waist-high grass.
Ooh. And so this, I feel like something like this dramatic, is probably most effective if the characters are from like a normal world and get ported into this place. So this is either, it is like a Ravenloft situation. This is somewhere you go or somewhere you access maybe another like demi-plane or something, because this is so dramatic. I feel like it would be difficult to just set this up like at the beginning of the campaign and be like, here you go, guys, like play in this, because the drama of it comes from how different it is from our real world. So so this is an interesting thing, and that's always something to consider too if you're doing like an apocalypse or semi-apocalypse, game or setting or story or whatever it is. Like, where is the drama of it, and what are you trying to do, mechanically?
Because this is interesting, because all undead basically cannot survive on the surface anymore because it's too radiant. And so that's the UDU portion, is the undead are basically, and I'm like, because that's what the Underdark needed, was a huge influx of undead.
No, just to make it worse. God, it's already so bad.
Well, the other thing that was interesting, it was noted earlier that basically like you have an intelligence threshold of 3. As to basically getting clerical abilities. Do we know the number of animals that now pass that threshold? And now you just have like creatures that are radiant infused and have basically spell-like abilities just because they're smart.
Everyone, like lions are casting dancing light to lure you into, the tall grass and eat your face. Like, oof.
Yeah, and so you have these, these creatures where now the world itself becomes more magical on a day-to-day basis, and that is inherently scarier. Plants that are infused with this grow rampant, and the creatures have it. Everyone now has access to a certain level of spells, which is the positive and the negative of it. I mean, you create industry to some degree because everyone can do something magical, literally magical.
But at the same time, natural species, like I would imagine carnivorous plants are doing great because like they eat other creatures, which will always be bountiful. Whereas things that photosynthesize light, like, are going to die off pretty rapidly. So oof.
So this is an interesting one. I like it, Letterlost. But that means you and I get to lift the mental weights right now.
Lifting weights is what I do. Look at me. Lift these weights.
Okay, we have 2 options here. We have the option of the one that we did together years ago, and we can just talk about that, which is basically my example. And Patreon listeners, you've heard a little bit of this, but it is like a potential project that we played around with, and it was really just a bunch of friends having a good time, which is what every actual play,
its own reward.
Every actual play is. But the base concept was player agency, where we would switch off who was being the dungeon master, but we worked together to build the world. And it's interesting because it is post-apocalyptic, but at the same time, it's what caused the setting to be there, but is also not what you engage with on a regular basis. I've said all those things, and now I've made it more confusing to someone who doesn't know what's happening. The quick hits are everyone is starting to travel to the moon because they've realized it is inhabitable and has plant life, flora and fauna, but like not really, not your basic elves, dwarves, humans, hobbits, halflings. Don't get me, Tolkien. Tolkien estate. I'm fine. Please.
From the grave.
Please leave me alone. But those sorts of things. And so everyone's traveling back and forth. Suddenly, from the perspective of those on the moon, the entire Earth, if you will, that they came from, catches on fire and just burns for a while. And the ability to go back and forth between the two is completely lost. And so now you're in a post-apocalyptic and frontier world, if you will, because now the entirety of civilization, as far as the player characters are aware, are now stuck on this moon and have no idea why this happened to the world they came from, or what they'll do.
Yeah. The orders are gone. Society is not telling you what to do. So
it is funny that the answer to the first question is very similar. And rather than radiant energy, we kind of came to the conclusion that this is a more magically infused setting. And so everyone got to start with the magic initiate feat, which is, that's fun. That's just a fun way to start a campaign.
That's just a fun way to go.
Yeah, handing out about it. Free feats, and is it that you find familiar? Is it that you do something else? And so the narrative reason is very similar. It's more that this place has so much magic infused with it that just being there is going to inherently give you some sort of power. It's so much fun. I mean, giving people free feats. I mean, I'm a sucker. I always love giving people free things.
Yeah, it's not example based, but something I've seen a lot, because I feel like the idea of an apocalypse setting or, a homebrew setting where something radical has changed, right? And the story has changed. I remember this was the first game I ever ran, basically had some kind of apocalypse scenario, whatever. And it was a horrible experience, top to bottom. It was a big mistake, but that's, GMs often your first experience is, especially with homebrew, is a nightmare for this reason. Let me bestow some wisdom. Let me spit it out for you. You have to be very careful when you do an apocalypse setting or something like this. You have to be careful not to take anything away from people. That I feel like is the first instinct of a lot of novice DMs. They're like, "Ooh, well, the world is different, so now we must take away the ability to cast this kind of spell," or all of a sudden people, can't sleep and they suffer exhaustion or whatever. These kind of things seem really narratively nice, and they work really well on straight paper, right? On lore, in your novel, awesome. But the best and most successful way to not piss off players, especially those familiar with the setting that you're running things in, is to actually add something. So if, in our apocalypse scenario, we were just talking about, gaining the magic initiate feat because magic is more abundant is a great example of, yes, definitely do this. Or perhaps it's something like, ooh, everybody has mutated just a little bit, right? So now on top of this, you get some kind of weird, everybody has a beast adjacent, trait. Oh man, you might be born with a weird lobster claw, but that gives you a cool attack that you can do in addition to everything else you could do as a fighter in the base game, that kind of stuff is paramount. I feel like when you're merging a concept big apocalypse stuff onto a fantasy game that might not traditionally embrace those elements of gameplay.
Yeah, and one of the ways that narratively and mechanically it was shown was the idea that up until this point, and these are the kind of things that you can do from a narrative perspective, is have things that weren't there that are just there in the base game. So you're explaining, so for the setting that we put together was no one had gone past a certain level of spell. I think we decided 3 to 5. And now that you're on this new place, people are starting to unlock spells that they otherwise just never even knew existed.
Now they can have 9th level spells. Whoa, it's so new. It's never been done before.
And then what happened is Letter Lost story happens, and then we blow up the moon, and it's dark, and now you have radiant and just apocalypse upon apocalypse until you really find what you want. But adding things. Then the counterbalance is, what am I adding to the other side of the screen? So if it's a monster, is it that the monster also does their damage fall into a magical category, or are they doing additional damage because they are now even more in tune with the magic of this world than the player characters? And so they're always adding fire or lightning or whatever it may be.
Or like, and I think this is something, maybe I've just been watching too much Fallout and playing Fallout, but like the mutation scenario, right? It's like if everybody in the world has a cool, like new sort of X-Men style mutation, that also means that the creatures are going to have that, right? So you're never just fighting a bear at level 1, right? They're mutant bears. They're two-headed bears. They're, like the undersea life is irradiated. Everything is giant. Everything is strange. So you can create those parallels to give people an extra, ooh, yeah, this is really different, but also what we're fighting and experiencing. Yeah, the challenges coming along with it too.
So then the you do you portion, and so this will be a piece that I'll put to you because I feel like it skirts the edge of did I take something away?
Yeah,
in an interesting way. So if we have firmly established that spells only went to, let's say, 3rd level, because like that's where really big things unlock, fireball, blah blah blah. I guess I am taking it away and I am allowing for the addition of things. What if only spells can be upcast? Like you can't gain 4th level spells, but you do gain additional higher level spell slots. And then you start working with your players to say, well, what does it look like for you to cast any spell at a higher level?
I think that would be okay if, one, you made sure during session 0, that was like clearly established. And then 2, you encouraged people to multi-class, which is something I've seen before. So it's like, and I've had some friends too bring this up. They're like, well, what if in my setting, right? Like for spellcasting classes, you can literally only go to like, I think it's 5th level that like caps out with the 3rd level spells. And that's the expectation from the beginning. Like nobody can be a wizard of 6th level or higher, right? Like you can only go up to here, but the definite expectation is that you will be multi-classing. So everybody in the world will have levels of fighter or rogue or one of the non-spellcasting or half-casting classes. So if you set that expectation, I feel like that's fine.
Yeah.
Like as people are walking into it, because that's pretty interesting. Like if, at character creation, everybody has to pick a non-spellcasting class, right? And then they get those levels, and if it's limited, like, that's very cool.
Yeah, because you look at, Baldur's Gate, they're like, look, you get to go to this level, and we're not going to let you go any further, because it's going to break our entire game.
Right. As long as you're okay, it's going to break the world, right? Like, we knew that walking into Baldur's Gate, so we were okay with it. Yeah. But if you didn't know that, you'd be pretty bummed out if you wanted to walk in and play a level 1 to 20 wizard, right?
So yeah, that's an interesting one of, trying to find the spaces and places. Because part of it is also, depending on how post or non-post you are to this apocalypse, how much you are really making choices with the players of like, okay, so then what are you doing? Like, how are you adapting to this change? Because again, the more post you are to that apocalypse, the more the world has figured out what it's meant for them and what they can do differently because of that. Whereas if it had just happened super recently, it could be like, we talk through like, okay, what does it look like? And still things are so undeveloped because you are in such a frontier place. And one of the other things, which is also kind of interesting, is how much we had the plant life be kind of a big deal because it is magically infused and has been for its entire existence. Yep. And it kind of doesn't like that people are here and it kind of wants to kill them.
It was doing its own thing, and you came along and caused a bunch of problems.
Yeah, like literally it was like a public service that we had made that like they have to fight back and forth the plant life. So yeah, it's interesting to decide something that becomes your apocalyptic thing. I think you should add it, even if it's a little bit, or you just dip your toes into it. I think finding something that's there, and also having it even be an enigma. It's one of the things about Eberron that's so interesting is, I've seen interviews with Keith Baker where he's like, I know why the day of mourning happened for me. He's like, and I'm not going to share that because
it should be the same, whatever the GM or whatever the story demands for each table.
Yeah. And his thing is like, but if I say what I think, then that becomes a canonized thing because I am Keith Baker who made this.
Right.
And I am not interested in that being what happens. I think you need to decide, or it just remains a thing that is ever looming of like, how did it happen? Could it happen again? Could it happen tomorrow? Or is it impossible that it would ever happen a second time?
Yeah. And don't be afraid too. We have the freedom in fantasy settings to make it not the whole world, but it could be part of the world that you go to. Like if a whole continent like the Mournland is a perfect example, outside of that, life pretty much functions normally in Eberron, but like there's this horrible place that is full of mystery that we don't go, right? And that's the Mournland. So your players can choose to engage with it or be forced to. They can come and go, which creates a lot of interest. And a lot of time in fantasy settings, like, why not? There's my magical bubble here, right? Like, this area is just affected. This whole continent is affected. It's sealed off from everybody else. It's a demi-plane you can step into through magic. There are endless ways to dip your toe into this idea and play with this kind of setting before committing to, oh man, the whole world is borked. Like, let's go along, players. Mm-hmm. There's, play around with it. There's so many creative ways to do this.
Chernobyl.
Yeah, just that radius of horror. It happened, like, in a world where you can do things like meteor swarm, going back to Letter Lost, great example, by the way. It's literally pulling comets and stars from the sky. Like, that is big heap in magic. And there's absolutely a precedent in that. In the Forgotten Realms, in Wizards of the Coast, the fall of the Netherese Empire, like, echoes through every single adventure path run in 5e, whether people know it or not. Like, that's how history, like, works,
Yeah, or you think of, like, the Spell Plague and, and all the ramifications that came from that. Like, it can affect the entire world and still those echoes be smaller ripples, because it is affecting everybody in a very specific way.
As life finds a way. So, the apocalypse can be somebody else's, another generation's apocalypse, or yours.
Well, and if you want to tell us about the apocalypse that you put in your game, you can always email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And of course, if you go over to Twitter, theoretically, Twitter, Blue Sky, Red Sky, which is our apocalyptic name, Black Sky, Purple Sky. I think that's a Prince song. But
very apocalyptic.
If you go there, you can find us at DMS_block or me at Jotmaniac, and that should get either of us on any of the social medias. And of course, or do you want to say your handle since you don't go on the social medias?
Yeah. Or, at CConowitch on X / also on Blue Sky / everywhere in the internet. You'll find me if you type in Celeste Conowitch on the internet.
And of course, for everything else on the network, you can always go to blockpartypodcastnetwork.com.
And a huge thank you, as always, to the bards over on Bombarded for our intro and outro music. You can find out more about Bombarded at bombardedcast.com.
Rather than let these mental gains go to waste, let's head to Taking Your Supplements. Taking Your Supplements! So, Celeste, I have a friend who works for a game distributor, and their quality assurance is really strict because apparently what ends up happening is that if a company sends something to them and it's damaged in any way, the person on the other end that is like the store owner is really only going to shoot that messenger. They're not going to be frustrated with the company. So a lot of things end up getting given away for free.
Ooh.
So I have an entire stack of books within arm's reach that I recently received with the slightest of dents in them.
Oh boy. Wow. You should link them up with Cobalt Press because, oh boy, did we have problems with our collector's box. Somebody apparently, for our collector's box for Tales of the Valiant, just put a giant crate on top of our boxes. So there is a clear square corner on literally 1,000
of course
of our boxes. Yeah. It's a whole thing.
One of the many things that I received recently is Old Gods of Appalachia, the role-playing game from Monty Cook using the Cypher system. But I feel like one of the things that is really important with games like this, and one of the biggest benefits that you can get out of a book like this, is several things. Yes, from a mechanical perspective, and I do understand that that's difficult because then I am essentially giving homework to say you need to do intelligent game design of pulling something from another system and putting it in. That's not what we're trying to do with this one. This one, though, going directly back to what we just talked about. If you want to figure out some interesting things to put in your post-apocalyptic world, this is the book to read.
Yeah. I mean, and also, if you all haven't checked out the Old Gods of Appalachia podcast, it is very cool. It's a horror podcast based on, lore and like all of this nonsense. So, I mean, I think, so the game itself is probably, set in 1920s/30s, like around that time. So it's got some like Lovecraftian, like eldritch evil vibes are always amazing additions to any kind of apocalypse setting or campaign.
Yeah, because you almost do kind of want to, I feel like you almost kind of want a scarier vibe for post-apocalyptic, because I think,
I think it's scary.
Yeah. And like all
the
of these
idea
things.
of it.
Yeah, the unknown. This is it's a really good book. I think you should absolutely pick it up. And as always, they don't know we're saying this, so...
Yeah. Also, the art is beautiful. Yeah. I'm just going through, like, the web previews. I'm looking at some of these, like, ballpoint black and white pieces, and then also, like, these full color... It's awesome, y'all. If you want a horror setting that is incredibly scary, I don't know what is happening, but I'm so scared. Do it.
Yeah.
Get it.
And a really interesting thing that don't think I can think of a book that's done this before, but is the sidebar and making page references to things in their sidebar.
Oh, that's nice. That's something Monty Cook is really good at. They have it in a few of their RPG books, so they must have some like really great editor who's like, you know what? References for people like me and you who just can't ever remember anything.
Yep. Hinder, skills, trained, specialized, and it's telling me what page all of these key terms
could be found on.
So if I needed to know what trained is, I could pop over to page 129 and learn that right there. Yeah.
Also, that cover, very cool. Creepy elk head on the front. Yes, it's a good looking book.
Yep. So we'll have a link to get that. And as always, we're going to try and link it as directly to them as possible rather than Amazon and all those other end arounds. But you will find a link to that book in the show notes. But with that, we'll turn out the lights and head out of the gym. But before we go, I want to implore you, the listener, to join us wherever you can find us. The forums, the Discord, Twitter, Blue Sky, a convention if you find us, come say hello, and of course anywhere else that you happen to see us, and take part in these challenges, exercises, and other amazing conversations being had.
To do that, head over to bit.ly/DMBanter and try some DM-Nastics so your players don't ask, do you even lift?